got to get every last note out of that song there, haven't we? Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Welcome this evening to Geeksvana Live, if it is evening for you, as it is here in the UK. Tonight, we're going to be talking about an incident which has already been through the courts, and it's actually already been appealed and that type of thing, etc. So we have something juicy to get our teeth into, but it isn't the case itself, although we're going to be talking in detail about the case to give us a bit of a background. I want this to be a community discussion on how we deal with a few things, but I'll come on to that. First of all, just a little quick update. Thank you again, as I was saying, everybody for joining us in the chat. Max Air 420, great to see you. Airless Mean, Michael, one of our channel members. You can become a member by clicking join below. There's also a link in the description as well. Ken's UK Adventures, great to see you. Dre, Recovery One Drone, Mark Sullivan, XJets, Bruce, good to see you as well. Chris Hearn, another one of our members. Johnny DRC, Legwork, also members. Yeah, Andy Corses, our senior moderator. Great to see everybody here. It's awesome to see the usual crowd coming to the Geeksvana streams, which I really, really do appreciate your support. It means an awful lot to me. We've been a little bit quiet on the channel the last couple of weeks. We've had this stream, then another stream about 6 days ago. I normally like to put 2 or 3 videos out a week plus a stream, but I've just been incredibly busy recently, frankly. On the weekend, we had the Lincolnshire Police Drone Education Day, which we attended to give a presentation on the hobbyist drone rules, which was an experience in itself. One of my first times speaking publicly about the UK drone rules. It was a bit strange. There's no edit button in real life, so I had to try and make sure that I didn't make too many mistakes. But certainly we got some good feedback there from the people who attended, and I think it all went off without too many hitches, which is fantastic. And I know Michael, Airless Mean, who's watching this evening, actually attended. So I'm glad you came along, Michael. Hopefully you learned something, if not about the rules, which obviously you know a lot about that from the Geeksvana channel, but you certainly got to see some cool police drones doing some awesome things as well. They actually live streamed police drones outside the police headquarter building, doing a couple of missions, etc., which was quite interesting. So they are going to be doing some more days, so keep an eye out on our Twitter feed and community tab for those, because they tend to be free tickets, but they do tend to go very, very quickly. So it's been a very busy week. It's also been a bit of a police focused week as well. We've just finished recording the next batch of content with the National Police Chief Council's counter drone team. They've been down to the studio, and we've been we've recorded another chunk of content, which is going to be very, very exciting. Some very, I would call them controversial topics, but only because they are controversial within the hobby at the moment. But the recorded side of things allowed me to drill down a bit more. Obviously, we had the fantastic live stream last week. Thank you, everybody, for coming along to that, so that I was really fresh going into that as far as the questions that the hobby and the questions that people really want answered. So I feel like we've done that. And the first videos on that will be out hopefully later this week. I've just got an awful lot of editing to do in the next few days, which I'm looking forward to as well. But we've also got some Mini 3 content coming out and some Avata content coming up as well. So keep tuned to the channel for those. We've also, of course, got the Emax giveaway, which is the Emax Hawk 3.5-inch quad. Now that was being given away through our review, which Ian over at Mads Tech very kindly helped me with that video to do the actual flight, because I still can't fly that kind of FPV quad. There we go. I still can't do full manual, certainly not to be able to review something. So he was very, very kind to do a bit of a bench test, etc. Now the competition itself is closed for that giveaway. It's a $400 and something drone, or quad, I should really call it. We're going to be doing the draw for that in our next live show after this one, which will be Monday the 3rd. So this coming Monday, which is a new show I'm starting with John Coopy, but there'll be more details on the community tab and everything else, Twitter, etc., and on Monday the 3rd itself regarding that, so we can tell you what kind of show that's going to be, because it's going to be a bit more of a regular show, that one, which I'm really excited to try. So yeah, so it's been a busy week. It's been a busy time, frankly. It's exciting times, but I find that the more busy we are, sometimes the slower it is to get the content out. So hopefully we're going to start to get that sort of balance right there. Basically, I still edit everything myself. I did go through a stage there where we had an editor and we had a bit more help behind the scenes, but I found that I was actually spending most of my time paying someone to explain to them how I want my videos edited, and actually I probably could have done it fairly simply myself. I only really use things like jump edits and that type of thing, and a lot of my videos are talking head studio videos as well. It's a little bit simpler. We do have some more stuff coming outside of the studio, which I probably will still use an editor for, but that's a whole other thing. So yeah, we're busy, lots of content coming, I think, is the message to take from that one. So tonight, as promised, we're going to be talking, having a bit of a community discussion regarding based around the issues raised by this case, which happened in sunny New Zealand, so down under, where Mr. Bruce Exjet is there. And this was actually produced by a chap called Tom Pills, who is aka the drone lawyer, who's based out of Australia as a senior solicitor with Lawbase, and he's recently penned an article on the case, which he's kindly allowed me to share with you, and then obviously hopefully spark a discussion about how we look at some of these issues basically moving forward, because I think it's an interesting one. Things like I don't want to use BVLOS for this one, because it's not as if the guy was allegedly flying miles and miles away, but the BVLOS certainly come into it. The discussion is going to focus around the arguments between the sort of lawful requirement of VLOS and the desire to fly BVLOS. So we've all got that desire to fly BVLOS, and again, I don't necessarily mean the 5 mile Mini 3 trials, but we've all got that sort of desire, certainly if it was legal, to fly a little bit sort of, I would almost call it extended visual line of sight, and being able to do more flights like that. And really I want to discuss, how do we think that that's actually going to happen, basically. Also, where the line of responsibility for a flight is, and how much tech can and cannot protect you, because I think this is an interesting one. It's interesting as well because, of course, New Zealand's air laws are fairly similar to the UK. Their legal systems fairly similar. I'm being very generic there, but of course it's the basic rules are very, very similar across the Western world, frankly. So you can find Tom on LinkedIn. There'll be a link to his profile in the description after the show, and later on I'm actually going to give you some of his takeaways from the specific case, which he's added for our show, which is very kind. Whereas our discussion tonight will, as I say, is going to be a wider community one that we actually focus on. So without further ado, let me bring it up. Now, if you've got anything to say on this, please at Geeksvana in the chat. And yeah, as I say, the idea of this is to be a community discussion. So this article was published on 14th of September 2022, and it starts off, as you can see here. Let me just move this back my page a little bit here. On February the 15th, 2018, because of course, as this has gone through its initial case, it's gone through obviously the investigation, initial case, and appeal, so it obviously takes years to be able to get through those stages. Mr. Pittman was flying his DJI Phantom 3 at a beach. I'm not going to even attempt to pronounce that particular beach name, which is located in the southwest of the Auckland region, on the west coast of New Zealand's North Island. I've spent quite a bit of time in New Zealand myself, and it is a very, very nice part of the country. The airspace above the beach is uncontrolled, so it's not restricted. Pittman had been there twice before. Now, before taking off, he checked with the Airshare website, so similar-ish to the sort of drone assist type affair, and satisfied himself that the airspace above the beach was not controlled airspace, and there were no potential hazards shown in the immediate area where he planned to fly. So essentially, this guy's looked at his version of drone assist. There's no restrictions. There's nothing showing on there at all, etc., as far as stopping him from being able to fly. So it turns out that the beach and its surrounds are popular, as I shoot up too high there for the chat there, sorry. It turns out that it's actually popular for paragliding and commonly used by a local paragliding schools for training. Now, Pittman was apparently not aware that the beach was popular with paragliders, so that's obviously one of the reasons why he's flying there, I would assume. When Pittman arrived at the beach, he set himself up away from other people and approximately 200 meters south of the launching spot used by the paragliders. Again, at this stage, he's apparently not aware that they're actually there, or that it's a site. because again, he checked his app and the app didn't come up with anything. He did not see any paragliders initially, and those he saw later were in the distance, further north of his position. He launched his drone and flew it without incident for 20 to 25 minutes before changing the battery. 20 to 25 minutes on a Phantom 3 is not bad. It was around this time that he saw a paraglider through his remote pilot's operator screen fly past his position heading south. Mr. Pittman then turned his mind to the possibility that paragliders might be operating near where he is actually flying. So that was one of the first times that he's really cottoned on. So he spotted it on the screen and then thought to himself, okay, there's a possibility that I'm in a paragliding area here. The drone was moving south, but with the camera facing north. So essentially, he's obviously trying to capture something over here. And with the I presume, I mean, with the Phantom, obviously you've got the camera will move all the way around. But so I'm not sure if it was backwards orientated or flying forwards with it pointing back. At the relevant time, Mr. Pittman was looking at the camera operator screen and suddenly saw an image on the screen spinning in circles. His drone had collided with a paraglider piloted by a student pilot and had become entangled in the brake lines. Now, the paraglider was able to land, but the drone, having become entangled in one of the brake lines, made steering difficult, as you might imagine. The paraglider was unhurt, but left shaken by the experience. And I'm absolutely sure that, you know, as a paraglider, there are all sorts of fears and that type of thing, but these people obviously still go ahead and enjoy that form of aviation. And yeah, that kind of incident is going to be pretty scary. A complaint was made to the New Zealand's Civil Aviation Authority about the collision and the manner of Pittman's flying on the day. So that's interesting. Now, 2 charges were brought by the Director of Civil Aviation against Mr. Pittman. Namely, firstly, that operating the drone in a manner that caused unnecessary endangerment to the paraglider, contrary to Section 44 of the Civil Aviation Act. The type of offending against S44 is broad and captures a wide range of activities. So, you know, Article 241, I'm thinking, in context of the UK. In the context of this case, what is required under S44 is proof that the defendant operated the drone, and so that they were that's one of the bits of proof they need, that he was the operator, and whether the way in which he did so caused danger that was otherwise unnecessary, judged from an objective standpoint. And that's one of these things, isn't it? Whenever we hear of this in the UK system as well, as far as, you know, the being judged from the perspective of a reasonable person and that type of thing, it's always an interesting one, that, because you can never be 100% sure where it's going to fall. And 2, that Pittman failed to give way and keep clear of a manned aircraft, namely the paraglider, as required by Civil Aviation Rule 101.213A over in New Zealand. Now, both charges are strict liability offences. That is, the offending act itself is enough and no intention element is required. And as Tim says here, it's comparing to a speeding offence. It doesn't matter if you didn't mean to do it. If you're found to do it, then the offence is proven. So, yeah, it really doesn't matter about the intention behind it. So the defence that was put up by Mr. Pittman at trial was absence of fault. So essentially what he's saying is that he submitted that what had occurred was actually an accident, an unintended and unforeseen mishap, and that his actions on the day were without fault. So again, as Tom has marked here, this might be comparable with the honest mistake of fact offence in Australia, but that's a yarn for another campfire, as he says. So essentially what he's saying is that there is an absence of fault. So not necessarily that it's not his fault, etc., but there is an absence, full stop, of fault. It's not the paraglider's fault. It's not his fault, because he has essentially been involved in an accident rather than it being something where he's endangered somebody. It's an unintended and unforeseen mishap. So it's an interesting one from that point of view. I suppose from the fact that he's actually checked apps and that type of thing, he's probably thinking that he's okay in those terms, which we will come on to, obviously. Now, the court found that there was no dispute that Pittman was the operator of the drone, which collided with the glider. The collision was clearly the result of a failure to give way on the part of Pittman, and the court was also satisfied that the collision did cause unnecessary and unavoidable danger, which is an interesting part. The trial issue was whether Pittman was totally without fault. A significant part of, sorry, it's just decided to start spooling there, of a significant part of Pittman's defence rested on the reliance he placed on Airshare and the information provided by that website, including the fact that the map of the airspace over the beach on Airshare failed to warn of competing users like paragliders. Pittman also pointed to a lack of warning signs at the beach itself, alerting people to the possibility of paragliders, or signs prohibiting drone use, to reinforce the submissions that Pittman had no reason to consider he should not fly his drone there or keep an eye out in particular for paragliders. And this is an interesting one to me, because I think there's many people that would fly that way, that would feel that that's an okay way to fly. They've checked drone assist, they've checked the area for signs, etc., for any kind of no drone signs and bylaws, etc., and they've also separated themselves by a good 200 meters from anybody else that's in the area. So it's an interesting one, because I could see a lot of drone flyers falling into that type of situation, frankly. The court found these defence arguments ultimately irrelevant for two specific reasons, and I will just run through these because they're important to the discussion that I want to put across. First, the prosecution did not suggest that Pittman was not allowed to fly his drone at the beach. He could fly the drone there. The issue at the heart of this trial is the way in which he operated his drone. Second, Airshare is not a authoritative source for safe flying practices by drone operators. The website itself makes it clear that the drone operator has a responsibility to read, understand, and operate any drones in accordance with the CAA regulations, the Civil Aviation Regulations, the CARs, as they're calling it there. Had Pittman consulted the CARs, which is what is expected of a reasonable and prudent pilot, he would have been informed by Part 71 of the visual navigation charts and their importance. The VNC covering the beach warns of hang gliders and paragliders using the airspace. So this is very much one of the videos that I made fairly recently, talking about not relying on the DJI app and really not relying on apps generally, in terms of, you know, the Drone Assist app is very, very good, and it gives you a lot of information, and the way that our airspace works, restrictions and that type of thing, it's going to be absolutely fantastic for. But little things like airfields that don't have an FRZ around them, and also often things like paragliders, etc., and that type of thing, although a lot of those are now on Drone Assist, certainly as a yellow ground hazard as well. But it's something that you need to be checking the airspace on. Certainly early on in this story, one of my points here that I would make is the fact that he did confirm that he actually had visual sight of paragliders and continued flying, basically. The court found that the fact that the Airshare map failed to warn paragliders using the same area does not alter, remove, or modify the crucial obligation incumbent on any pilot, that the obligation is to maintain situational awareness, to maintain observation of surrounding airspace in which the aircraft is operating for other aircraft to keep clear. And this is an interesting one, because this is really part of the core side of things in terms of my personal opinions on visual line of sight, that and how I fly. And again, hopefully everybody knows that, you know, I talk a lot about the rules, I talk a lot about the regulations, etc. But this is very much information that I pass on for you to do with what you want. I'm not telling you personally, not judging you or telling you how to fly your drone. But for me, visual line of sight doesn't just mean I can see a speck, doesn't just mean I can see a beacon flashing in the sky somewhere. It means that I can actually see the airspace around the drone and take action that's required should anything enter that airspace, etc. But also that I can see the drone properly and I can see which way it's going, etc. Now, that's just my personal interpretation of visual line of sight, and everybody differs, sometimes quite dramatically from that. And that's obviously, again, here in the UK, we have the generic 500 meter guidance from the CAA, but that's obviously also under advisement from the point of view you should change that if the drone is smaller. So something like a Mini 2, Mini 3 is going to be obviously much closer than that. Interestingly, under the new guidance, under the new acceptable means of compliance, which is being submitted by the CAA, they're removing the 500-meter thing here in the UK, and it's more going to be very much about this type of thing of actually being able to maintain observation of the surrounding airspace, etc. Actually very, very similar wording. So it'll be interesting how that happens. So as an extra pop-up just opened on my computer, which was rather disconcerting. There we go. We're back. Even if Pittman was not aware that paragliders were in his general vicinity before launching his drone, on the first occasion, he did see two in the distance at some point. He later became aware of one's presence when the paraglider flew past his position towards the southern end of the beach. A reasonable person would have then contemplated the possibility that other paragliders might also be nearby. From that precise moment, he should have appreciated his flying might pose a hazard to others and in the air, sharing the same airspace as his drone. And I think this is probably the first part where I see a clear distinction between most of the drone flyers that I know and a lot of the audience that I chat to in our Discord channel, and myself, frankly, where I've taken reasonable checks. I've tried to ascertain whether or not the airspace is clear, and you know, I'm not aware of the paraglider site and that type of thing. But actually, once I start seeing them flying, then I'm going to take action. I'm not going to fly. I had this exact situation in a famous beauty spot here in the UK called Newlands Corner, which is near Guildford. Many people in Surrey in the UK will know it as a hot spot when the snow comes. It's got some fantastic hills where everybody goes out with their sleds, etc., and has snowball fights, etc. It's a great place. If there's any snow in my part of the country, you can be guaranteed there'll be lots of snow up there. And I went up to fly my drone. It wasn't actually on a snowy occasion, just more because it's a beauty spot. And there was a paramotor, and I decided to obviously not put my drone up. He was just above the trees, and in actual fact, I didn't fly that day at all because I wasn't happy that I was 100% sure that he had gone, because especially as he was so low, just above the trees, that he wasn't somewhere around still. Basically, whether he had a problem or anything else or not, I don't know. So I think that's the clearest differential that I see to begin with, that actually this Pittman chap didn't actually take any kind of evasive action to make his flight safe from that point of view. Personal opinion on that, though. Pittman maintained that he was fully aware of the importance of keeping a clear line of sight of his drone, and he did always do so. However, his evidence was rejected. Had he maintained actual line of sight at all times, the expansive clear sky overhead of his position on the beach and the good weather at the time means he should have seen the paraglider. So that's an interesting one, isn't it? That they rejected his evidence that he always flies within visual line of sight, because essentially they're saying, well, you couldn't have line of sight of the drone in the way that you're intended to, and the way that you're expected to, because the accident occurred, frankly, or the incident occurred, I should actually call it, rather. Pittman himself admitted in court that perhaps there was, at times, I could have looked at the screen a little too much. But before the crash, I just remembering reference checking constantly. So yeah, to the best of my knowledge, I was spending a fair, equal time between the two, and we will come on to talk about this in a few minutes as far as the screen time, etc. Now, the prosecution called for some expert evidence from Ms. Jane Marsh, and they established her credentials here. And again, in her opinion, it should be 90% looking and 10% down here. So only 10% should be checking. She was essentially calling them instruments, so things like telemetry, etc., on screen, which is an interesting one, because I don't know any camera drone pilot, obviously not FPV, but any camera drone pilot that would actually do that, that would actually only spend 10% of the time looking at their screen. moreover, because of course you've got a situation where you're trying to get the shot, you're trying to see if your gimbal movement is smooth and that type of thing, etc. So it's interesting. Let me know what percentage in the chat you think, as a camera drone flyer, you should be watching the sky. So is it 50-50? Is it 70-30? Is it 90-10 as this expert witness is stating? Let me know your thoughts on that. And again, it's just our individual personal thoughts. So if Pittman was overly reliant on flying the drone by first-person view, FPV, as opposed to watching the craft in the air, it would best explain why he did not see the paraglider. Pittman would have been flying south, using a camera facing north to look in the opposite direction of his travel, which is obviously the shot he was trying to get. It would have been akin to steering a car in forward direction by reference only to the rear vision mirror, which bears all the hallmarks of fault. This is obviously Tom asserting this. Using FPV would also explain why Pittman was unable to see the surrounding airspace in which his aircraft was operating. And it certainly, if the claim is, and certainly I don't see any suggestion in here that they feel that the drone was beyond the visual line of sight in the traditional sense that you might expect when you hear BV loss, that it was 2 miles away or anything and therefore couldn't be seen. It's more that they feel he was over reliant on his screen time, basically, which perhaps is a bit of a wake-up call as well, frankly. The court's view that spending equal time between FPV and keeping actual sight of the drone demonstrates an unacceptable level of discipline. It is this behaviour that falls well below the standard of care and skill reasonably expected of a prudent and skillful pilot. So, interesting one there. The court concluded that Pittman's over-reliance on FPV to fly his drone on the day and his corresponding failure to maintain visual line of sight resulted in failing to remain clear of the paraglider. So essentially, his over-reliance on the screen is because obviously the camera is pointing in the different direction to that which he's flying, is the entire reason why he hit. Now, the penalty side, there's going to be a link in the description to this. There's a whole thing about the penalty side of things. One of these can carry 12 months imprisonment or a $10,000 fine. Another is a $2,000 fine, but no actual conviction. There's a whole thing in New Zealand, which I won't go into now, as far as being able to mitigate that quite strongly in terms of appealing, etc. So the appeal that went through was more based on the type of conviction, and the results of that again are in this article, which I'm not going to go into too heavily, because it's literally the New Zealand law surrounding how convictions are dispensed with, how sentencing happens, etc. Because essentially the court is allowed, as it says here, to discharge an offender without conviction, provided the court is satisfied that the direct and indirect consequences of a conviction would be out of all proportion to the gravity of the defence. And the final decision was that the court dismissed Pittman's appeal and maintained the conviction. The closing remarks were that while each case is decided on its own facts, there are some key learnings in this case which help to guide all operators on what the court may consider to be important or relevant, and what things the court might not find persuasive. We note that this is a New Zealand case, so generally not binding in Australian courts, which of course it wouldn't be in the UK courts either, of course, but could be persuasive in assisting an Australian court in making a decision. That's interesting. It's obviously final comments here from Tom. Also, obviously, the laws are different in NZ, although there are clearly some similarities. This summary is a combination of the three court events: the trial and the sentencing and the appeals. There are links to all of those on this page, which will be in this full report with the appeal process, etc. And those documents links will be in the description straight after the show once I put them there, basically. So, to me, this raises a few sort of overall issues that we need to discuss. Visual line of sight. What is safe? What does it mean? And now we're losing here in the UK the 500-meter general guidance, and it's coming down to a much more descriptive version of that. Let me just get rid of that. what is safe? How do we interpret what is a fair distance in terms of keeping the drone in airspace that we can see and react to, etc. So I think that's going to be an interesting one. How should you check your flight is clear. How do you check your flight is clear indeed as well, and what can you rely on to do that, and how do we solve these issues moving forward? Because of course we want clear advice, we want clear guidance on how we can stand up in court should anything happen and say, I checked drone assist, I checked NOTAMs, I checked for ground hazards, etc. There's no signs, the local authority didn't have a bylaw, etc. At what point do we reach the point of that we have attempted to carry out safe checks? And this is very much here in the UK as well, exactly what I'm talking about when I'm saying don't just rely on your DJI app to do that, basically. Let's have a quick look up through the chat before we move on to what are Tom's takeaways from this case, and also get some more points on that. So let me know what you think in the chat regarding what is safe VLOS, how you personally judge the distances, what you're looking for, that type of thing. I'd be really interested to know. But I did see quite a few people answering in the chat in terms of, and the chat's going very, very, very busy tonight. Thank you guys. I really appreciate everybody coming in. Great to see such a great crowd. Yes, so here's some of the percentages. Paul Taylor says 70-30. Ken's UK Adventures, 95% if flying backwards. Yeah. That's a really good point, actually, Ken. It's good to see Ken. Ken is always coming up with some very good points and very good debates in the comment section of my video. So I really appreciate your engagement, Ken, with the channel. But 95% if flying backwards, I think that's a really, really great point from the point of view that, of course, if you're flying backwards and therefore your camera isn't pointed towards the horizon you're aiming towards, then absolutely 95%. On the drone. I agree with that. Bronos Drones, I love that username. 75-25. Okay. Jason, GMI Visuals, good to see you, sir. I'd say 70-30. Coach 77060 actually agrees with Jason. They're saying 70-30, as long as you both mean 70-30 the right way around. Dennis says 100% FPV. Moira 79-30%, or I presume that's 70-30. Audio Gek, great to see you. FPV, 80 screen, 20 drone. And Chris Hearn says he watches the drone for about 70% of the time. So it seems to be sort of 30-70, 70-30 either way that people are looking at this. And again, as with Ken's point there, perhaps that will differ in terms of what you're actually doing. How far away was the paraglider? We don't have that information, but it was certainly in the court records. And when I looked at the files, etc., when I looked at into the links of the actual hearings, there wasn't a dispute to say that he was flying dramatically far away. So it's the BVLOS argument was that he was looking at his screen too much, basically. So that he didn't see it. Well, of course, you know, a paraglider isn't like a Spitfire or a Cessna or something coming over the hill. It's not going to be making much of any noise from that point of view. Bruce XJet says FPV drones always have the camera facing forward, so if there's a collision, the other craft must have hit the drone. Not the drone hitting the other craft. Yeah, it's an interesting point actually, because of course it is with FPV. It is the FPV camera is of course a situational awareness camera, isn't it, Bruce? That's a very good point. If you've got a GoPro on top or something like that, which is capturing the footage, the FPV pilot isn't sat sort of obsessed by that. The only image on screen, of course, is their flight and in the correct in the correct direction. Has anybody ever tried to fly an FPV drone indoors or something somewhere safe with the camera facing backwards? That would be a bit strange. Dre Recovery One Drone says it's more about using several senses to have flying awareness. One, you'll hear an approaching aircraft before you see it. Two, panning the skies only takes a few seconds. Exactly, and to me, very much how I was taught in my GVC training, you need to scan the airspace as quadrants during the time that your drone is in the sky. That's very, very important to do. So I agree with you there. 4060 says Robert Glasgow. Thank you, Robert. XJet says, yet strangely, you could fly a reasonably heavy free flight model at that location with no way of controlling it once launched. Yeah, and that's that, and that's part of it, isn't it? Really, it's how do we find a way that's, as a subsection of aviation, and a subsection of aviation that is in terms of operators and in terms of numbers is far outstripping the commercial manned aviation sector. So we are the big force and the growing force, certainly on the commercial side of things within aviation. How do we get these guidance and get these rules under control? What is that level of where you step across the line and say, okay, my flight is safe now? Flying Low says, good to see you, by the way. I spend about 80% of my time watching the surrounding area of the sky. That's excellent. Paul Taylor, having studied for my PPL, I have utmost respect for human flight, and now always check before I fly the area on the day, and NOTAMs, always looking and listening. I completely agree with you there. I think the fact that obviously it is manned aviation, there are people up there, is 100% the main priority that I give in safety terms as well. And Flying Low also says, always be, or Flying Low with the surname Low, quite ironically, also says always be prepared to take action for emergency services or military flying in. Yeah, that again is something very important. The drone education day that I spent time at on Sunday that I was talking about, we had the RAF there as well, talking about their sort of NOTAMs and flight restriction zones, etc. But low flying military aircraft, very very important. Low flying emergency services helicopters, very very important to keep an eye out for, because they will come in quick and fast. And of course, delaying an emergency services helicopter is the same as delaying an ambulance on the road, frankly, in my opinion. So you need to be very very careful from that. Dynadrone says I tried to have a VO as well. And actually know a lot of people that do that, even on the camera drone side of things. Actually, it's good to see you. I hope you're well. It was nice to meet you at one of our member video meetups, which we will be putting October's in the diary very very soon. To keep an eye out on the community tab for that, everybody, and the Discord channel. There are apps that Paraglider, Paramotors use to get distance and speed, height, etc. that they're at. Okay, that's interesting. Do they track? I presume they don't track the paraglider, although if they've got a phone in the air, that might be some form of tracking. Do we start tracking paragliders? Mr. Williams, UK War Machine, good to see you. In an open field, lots of screen viewing. I do a lot of urban flying, so I watch the drone and glance at the screen to adjust the gimbal. I always forget to press record. Yeah, we've all been there, for certainly, Mr. Law Williams, UK. It's one of those things that I think, if you are flying in an urban environment, obviously, I think we naturally tend to spend more time looking at the drone because there's so many more things to hit, of course, and interact with, shall we say, with our drones. So no, that's a very good point. Views of Cornwall, great to see you, Jeremy. Hope you're well. I fly mostly over the sea. I try to lock onto my subject so I can still manually fly with VLOS, looking at the drone as much as possible rather than the screen, still knowing the subject is in shot. And that almost, and a couple of other people's, and thank you for the people who have put their percentage in there as well. I realize I asked that as a specific question, so I'm not sort of attacking anybody for any percentage that they've put in, because it's all about open, honest conversations here at Geeksvana. But that's an interesting one, because that's very much, Jeremy, how I look at things as well, that you have to assess the situation that you're in. And I think my percentage can float around a little bit depending on the type of flight, depending on where I'm flying, that type of thing. But of course, I'm always aware that wherever I am, the airspace above me can change very, very quickly. 107 Drones, hi Barclay, good to see you. It depends on your mission. When flying an Avata low to the ground, I don't see it, move my cursor down here, too often as it meanders around the forest. Yeah, no, indeed, it is an interesting one. And the Avata, I think, is giving a lot of people their first real relaxing sort of, out for a fly type of thing. With the FPV drone behind me here is a little bit more fast and furious, so I think we were all a little bit more mindful. But yeah, it's an interesting point. I think the Avata is certainly opened people's eyes to the differences in visual line of sight, etc. And Jason GMI Visual says basically FPV is like driving a car, looking through the windscreen, turning head when needed, turn drone to look around. Yeah, I agree and disagree with that, as you might expect, Jason. I do agree that when I put goggles on for the first time flying the monstrosity behind me, although I love it personally, I do agree that I had more situational awareness than I expected, as I said in my initial review video of that drone, and that did surprise me. That did surprise me. I didn't expect to have quite so much situational awareness. I don't think it's the same as being on the craft, being in the car. Personally, I just don't think that is the situation. But then I'm not as experienced in FPV as many people. Mike Drennan, great to see you, one of our moderators, and he has the very special 24-month badge after his name for being an ardent supporter of the channel for more than 2 years. So thank you, Mike. I really appreciate it. I hope you and Shirley and the kids are well. If you threw a 750-gram stone and hit someone, would you be held accountable? How is hitting someone with a 750-gram camera any different? Yeah, it's interesting because we're obviously being held accountable, and we're being held up through the same aviation law surrounding everybody else that's up there in the airspace. Not everybody, I realise, before people start shouting about the things that you can fly unlicensed, but certainly the regulated, certainly regulated aviation. So and that's one of the themes that's starting to come up a little bit at the moment, in terms of how do we look in terms of gaining the right advice, gaining the right judgment for things like VLOS, etc. So I think it's going to be important. But thank you, Mike. I completely get your point. Audio Geek, people have done 2 FPV cams on board with a switch and flying backwards and forwards. That's awesome. That is awesome. Oh, there we go. I am famous. We're getting the best adult dating site. Is XJet chatting to them? He sometimes likes to chat to the bots. There we go. XJet identify as a spam bot. And yeah, Jeremy says, me too, dippers depending on the flight and where it is. But yeah, I completely agree with that. Hawkwind Droneworks, if there are other manned AVE aircraft in my area below 400 feet where I'm operating, then I'm spending 80% watching my drone and only 20% glancing at the screen. Exactly, which to me, unsurprisingly, I don't think anybody's particularly surprised that the vast majority of us out there flying drones are trying to do it safely, are actively trying to do it safely. You know, I do feel sometimes we get tarnished with the brush of that we somehow want to be sort of reckless and rebels and that type of thing. But my experience is the vast majority would like to fly responsibly, would like to fly safely, and actually would just like the guidance and that type of thing from that. So we'll hop back very quickly. I'll come back to the chat in a few minutes, but we'll hop back very quickly with 7 very quick takeaways that Tom Pills, the drone lawyer, who very kindly allowed us to share the article, which I thought was very well written, and go through his 7 takeaways from it and see if we agree or disagree with those. So number 1, relying on apps for your ops flight is not enough. Consult authoritative sources. I agree with that, and I did say at the talk again on Sunday that if anything smells a bit off on Drone Assist, if you get a circle for a NOTAM, but perhaps the paragraph cuts off before the explanation is there, Google the NOTAM number, go and have a look at the NOTAM in full and find out exactly what's going on. Find out exactly, even if that first paragraph you feel like explains things to you, go and have a proper look. Go and see if there's contact details of someone that you can tell. Often with temporary flight restrictions these days, there is a requirement for the NOTAM sponsor, the NOTAM owner in inverted commas, to actually have their contact details on there, so people can contact them to arrange flight within the area, even during the restriction times, if it doesn't conflict, etc. But of course, that they will let you know that. Often it's event organisers or counter drone companies or police, etc. Number 2. So I probably agree with his first takeaway there. Number 2, monitor your direct line of sight to remote control display site. 50/50 required and up to around 90% VLOS preferred. And that is almost, again, exactly what you live chat, speaking to you as a generic 130 people that are watching. That's very much what you guys are telling me as well, that anywhere between the sort of 50/50, even down to 60/40, 70/30, and up to around 90%, depending on what's actually happening, depending on what's happening on the flight. I think most of us would agree that we wouldn't be flying a drone backwards or in the opposite direction to the camera facing for any length of time without being able to 100% see that drone at all times. The third point, his third takeaway, was stemming from point 2. Situational awareness is key, which I agree with, especially within urban areas. Point 4, pre-flight checks of environment, terrain, and other air users is important. Once you identify a risk, take that into account in your op. And that's really where I think Mr. Pittman fell down for me. I had certain sympathies and certain allowances in my mind when I was reading the his Tom's article, but also the accompanying papers. It's something that I think we can have a lot of sympathy for, but then when you get to the point where he's seen other paragliders in the area on his camera, etc., and he still decided to fly in the opposite direction to where his camera's pointing and rely on the FPV screen, etc., that type of thing, I think 100% that we need to be very, very careful about what's happening up there. And if we see anything change while we're up there, as people have said about EMS helicopters and that type of thing, then yes, we need to make changes in our operation. Point 5, the number 5 of his 7 takeaways. If you have an accident and it goes to court, the court will look favourably upon you if you stick around and do what you can to rectify the situation at the time. Indeed. Again, I completely agree with that point, actually. I wasn't sure whether I'd agree with all of these, so I've been mulling them over today. 6, strict liability offences are typically hard to beat, with honest mistake of fact being one of the few limited defences. And yet strict liability offences are very much the same anywhere, frankly. And 7, not all aviation offences carry a criminal conviction, but some do. If charged, be sure to be careful. Be sure to carefully review all charges and associated penalties. Indeed, very much know what you're getting into. So yeah, I agree with that. So again, thank you, Tom. His link to his LinkedIn will be in the chat below. So VLOS and safety. To me, it's an interesting one, and I think it's something which is evolving. Hence, the UK CAA are changing their definition within their acceptable means of compliance, which has just gone through public consultation. So we are starting to see some of those things change. Ian Simpson said, might be worth having a joint stream with the Black Belt Barrister just to get a feel on how things are viewed from the other side. Yeah, that's an absolutely fine idea. And as you have seen, I've had many different people from many different sides of the industry and etc. on the channel. Daniel's a really great guy as well. However, do bear in mind that, of course, that is a barrister's opinion, as he always does state in his videos. So it would be interesting, as you say, a view from different sides, but that would just be a view that is one barrister's view based on his huge experience, of course. But really what I'm trying to get on this channel is more the sort of the guidance and the guidance from authorities, those that are actually going to prosecute us, etc. That's where I tend to stick at the moment. But again, you know, I have debates on this channel with Bruce from XJet. Everybody is welcome. But I have actually spoken to Daniel previously, but we didn't move things forward actually. Other comments here in the chat. Kernow Radio, good to see you. Hope you're well. Someone just buying a drone from Argos could be oblivious to the rules and not even being aware of the discussion we're having now or anything like drone assist, etc. Yeah, it's and as Jason's also saying, yeah, don't run away. Absolutely, and it's that is to me one of the biggest issues that we have, and why I think we might sometimes feel like we're a little bit put upon as a hobby, particularly in the UK with the changing drone rules, that the regulation has to cover all types of drone operator, and we now have drone users that see their drones as nothing more than a mobile phone. It's not a hobby to them. It's not a pleasure pursuit or anything. It's just, I want to take a picture at this restaurant. Where's my phone? Oh, I want to take a picture at the beach. Where's my drone? There you go. There's an advert for someone there. Invoice in the post. So we now have that occasional user coming into the marketplace, and we now have that type of drone hobbyist that isn't really anything to do with the hobby as such. So how to reach those people is an interesting one. We could put lots of documentation in the box. We could insist on certain things before they purchase it, etc. There's all sorts of ideas. I've never quite found the one that I'm completely happy with, basically. Um, Miss Williams War Machine answering Andy there. So that one is part of that conversation. Audio Geck, an experienced FPV pilot scans the environment continuously when flying and pretty much knows exactly where the risky don't go spots are, while outsiders fear for their life just because of the sound. Yeah, I completely take that on board. I really do. And you know, the safety of the hobby speaks volumes, doesn't it? Really, from that point of view as well. And it's us pesky camera drone guys that have come along and ruined the RC hobby, many would say. Andy Cortez says, saw the drone display in a gadget shop in Merry Hill the other day. They had a QR code on the drone, on a code on the front display. Don't know how many would actually scan it and read it though. Yeah, I mean, at least they're trying to do something, which I think is a good idea. I do wonder, I don't know how people in the chat feel about there being some kind of stipulation that when you purchase a drone, you have to register it there and there at the till or something, so at least they can trace the drone back. But that's not, registration doesn't make you safe, I suppose. But certainly doing a flyer ID and perhaps tapping the flyer ID into the drone or something, who knows? And Mark Sullivan says, yeah, we've talked about the drone regulations. What about the regulations on the paragliders? Well, yeah, I mean, the paraglider being an a wind-based aircraft and a manned aircraft, the drone should always be giving way to that. So no, I understand what you're saying, but certainly in this instance, I think the drone operator was 110% there. Johnny RC said, if the police are seen walking to you, hand your radio to the guy standing beside you. Excellent advice there, Johnny. Agree with one, agree with two. However, I love dolly zooming, which is pretty much all backwards flying. Agree with three, agree with four. Drone assist is a doddle. Agree with five. Yep, exactly, Chris. I find myself agreeing with a lot of these points, I have to say. I do agree with you there. And XJet replying to Johnny's point about handing the remote off, just pretend that you're still flying and therefore the drone on the ground can't be yours. Yeah, indeed. And Bruce is also saying that it's the national bodies who haven't stood up to the regulators who have ruined the traditional RC hobby. I do have sympathy for the RC flyers, and I've always expressed that. The RC model community, I'm part of a fantastic club, a BMFA club here in the UK, and they taught me an awful lot, a lot of the basics when I first started flying, and particularly about safety, and particularly about they really inbuilt that safety into me from the very beginning, about pits and about, you know, ensuring that my drone isn't active, etc., and that type of thing, ensuring that I have full control, that I know everything about the safety side of things. Interestingly, you don't get any of that kind of training with the flyer ID, and even with the A2 COC and more advanced courses. So yeah, it's interesting that it's actually from a RC flying club that I learned that level of safety that I haven't seen repeated in quite the same way. Yeah, I think the Mini 3 Pro is restricted by price, so I think it's more likely to be a grown-up. Maybe a CAA info link should be in the app. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I think perhaps it could take you there before the app fully launches or something. I don't like messing with people's things, because if someone buys a piece of tech, I think that they should get access to what they've purchased. But I feel like we need to do something, especially for the not outsiders, but for, as I say, the non-hobbyists that are starting to come into the industry. XJet, the exception is that a model glider must give way to a powered manned aircraft. Is that fair? So a model glider must give way to powered manned aircraft. Is that fair? I think it is fair if it's, you know, an unmanned model glider. Oh, I see what you mean. You're being funny with me. Sorry. I was taking you seriously for 2 moments. Paul Taylor, at the end of the day, it is only a very small number of people around the world who either don't know the laws or are unwilling to know. Yeah, I agree with you. Obviously, the hobby is, it isn't in its millions. I think it's something like 500,000 registered pilots here with the CAA in the UK, which is a lot. And I think that it's a growing hobby, and I think as those numbers grow and as the numbers of Mini 3s, you know, up in our skies increase, I think the issues will become more common, frankly. So although I think that the numbers are still relatively small to other issues out there, I think it's there. Gimbal Air says the GVC OE is weak as a test too. And de-ice, love that name, very aviation. Maybe it's time to equip paragliders with remote ID, geofencing, and a 400-foot flight ceiling. Yes. And Bruce says, I was taking you seriously. What are you drinking, Sean? Yes, indeed. Excellent. Well, that's it for this discussion. I've taken a lot away from it. I think that it's something that I want as a discussion to keep moving forward with. And I think certainly here in the UK, I think we need more discussion and more clarity about a visual line of sight and what it actually means, especially with the CAA's acceptable means of compliance changing very soon. And yeah, please keep this feedback coming. It's going to be a continuing conversation, including, of course, with the CAA, including with the authorities that are going to be enforcing this, etc. So there will be more content based on that coming up. And all of this helps me, informs me as far as what people are actually doing and how the hobby is already dealing with this. Because again, I assume the vast majority of hobbyists are already dealing with this because we don't have drones hitting paragliders and planes and everything else every day. So I assume that as a hobby, we are demonstrating ourselves to be safe. Frankly, I don't have to assume it. It's there in the stats. So coming up on Geeksvana, we've got, obviously, as I said, we've got the releases coming up, the collaboration with the MPCC drone team again, including some really controversial topics and hot topics at the moment that I feel like we've really hit head on this time as well. A little bit more in depth than the live shows because I don't have 100 things going on that I've got to control. So I was able to really spend some quality time and really concentrate on the conversation, which I think is fantastic. So yes, and as Akirasho can have the final comment from the live chat. Geeksvana, how clear? How badly can I mess up a live chat? How clear can you make mud? Yeah, indeed. An interesting point to make. So again, thank you very much to all of our channel members. I can see you all there in the chat. Uncle Bill's Toys, Chris Hearn, Views of Cornwall, Dynadrone. I really appreciate you all coming in. It's fantastic to have these conversations. I'm really enjoying these. We will have more content, as I was saying, varied content, recorded stuff coming up in the next few weeks, and the number of videos per week will increase up again. But yeah, I really appreciate you all coming in. I can't say it enough times. I really do appreciate it. Again, coming up at 10 o'clock. Let's see if I've cut and pasted anything since. Nope. There is another live show coming up here. Now we've got 116 people. It'll be about 10 o'clock because I know that the host has some other things on today. But that is a live stream that's going to be talking to a chap from FR Sky. You're going to be able to see Bruce interrogating that gentleman, that individual. So it'll be a fascinating chat. It's very, very similar to the type of chats we have on here, but there's always a panel of a few people. I don't think I'm going to be able to make it this evening. I was on there last week, but do go across and show your support and put a hashtag Geeksvana in the chat if you do make it across there. And yes, I will see you all next time on Geeksvana Live. Sean out. I think it's worth coming back to say thank you very much, Mike Drennan, for the £5 super chat. I really appreciate it. Cheers, Sean. Thanks for the great content. No, thank you, Mike. Thank you to you and the others who support the channel directly through channel memberships and gifts like that. I really do appreciate it. Sean out this time.